Well, the Amityville Horrors. Hello. This is Glenn Fleetwood, former criminal defense lawyer. And I'm helping you in your efforts to keep on top of the Heurmann murder trial. Now, there are some terrific, tremendous developments today, including the Amityville Horror. It turns out Amityville is going to play a role in Mr. Heurmann's prosecution. He has a storage locker there that's full of things. They haven't told us what's in it yet, but they were there yesterday. For those who are listening today, Monday, he was there on Sunday. The authorities were there, and they opened that storage locker and took every last thing in it away, and they're going to look in it for more clues, as if they need more clues to connect good old Rex to the 3 murders he's been charged with and the 1 additional killing in which he's been named as a suspect. So that will be very interesting. Now, here's the question that some people are raising right now. And boy, it's a tough one. Some people are saying, hey, there may not have been a blinking neon sign pointing, hey, here's the guy. But there was some weirdness around him that if somebody had said, you know what, that's kind of weird, this guy might have been caught 10 years ago. Now, what is that weirdness? It's a weirdness that's hard to put into exact words, but there's a woman that they have on some vague inquiries into this showing, and she said when she took her kids trick-or-treating, she wouldn't let them near that part of the street. When she would get through her neighborhood and to the part of the street where Rex Heurmann lived with his wife and 2 grown sons, 2 grown sons, he's 59, so his sons must be at least 20 years old. What are your 20-year-old sons, both of them, doing living at home? That's awfully friggin' weird. But here's the point. The house was in disrepair. Many people said that the front patio or the front sit outside and talk to the neighbors, that the roof had already collapsed in. The roof had already collapsed so that you couldn't sit on the front porch. Now, that's probably a violation of some sort of zoning law, maybe a homeowners association, if that particular street has one. But I want you to think about this. If you had a neighbor who you heard was in the business of being an architect, in other words, he would design properties for wealthy people, and hopefully builders would build them, and that's how he earned his living. What would you think of an architect who had a house that looked like it was from a horror movie? That it had the roof of the front patio caving in, it was in complete disrepair, it looked filthy, it looked like homeless people lived there. How could a guy who has an office in Manhattan as an architect have a house that looks like trash? Something is not right there. And that's been there the whole time. The people who know, I'm not going to say know him, because nobody says they knew him. Nobody wants to be a part of that. But the people who live near him say it's looked like that as long as they can remember, and that house had a real good view of the area where the bodies were disposed of. We're talking about the 4 bodies that he is a suspect out of 3 of those 4. So you've got a guy who across some body of water is able to see where the murders occur. He's in the field of architecture and should have a house that is a model, right? And instead, he has a run-down shack that people are ashamed of, and nobody remembers seeing anybody come in or out of it. This house was screaming for a welfare check by police or social services or somebody to come by and just say, what's going on at this weird house? Why does a guy who has an office in downtown Manhattan, extremely expensive, I believe one of the most expensive business addresses in the United States and maybe in the world, why does he have a house that looks like that homeless people live in it? Sorry if I don't have a better word for homeless. People without a fixed address live in that house. Something's going on there. And nobody did. Remember, there's developments also in the DNA aspect of this case. That's coming up the outside fast. We've got DNA now that we don't have to have those huge chunks of DNA that we needed before to track people down. We can now do it with just the smallest possible, bigger than a grain of sand, but nowhere. We don't need the eraser on a pencil size anymore. So Rex they got with a discarded pizza box. That's how they got his DNA. But of course they had to connect it to somebody. So actually, we should look at it this way. By the time they were looking at the pizza box, they already had their eye on him. So that's not the way they do it. But they tapped the DNA of the killer, and how did they find out to trace that to Rex Heurmann? Remember, this is the second one we know of. They're probably doing this with all of them now, is the truth of the matter. But this is another one where they sent it to one of those for-profit companies that says, hey, we'll tell you your genealogy. Do you want to know who is in your lineage? Hell no, please. The news is bad enough knowing when I have to just open my eyes and say, oh, God. But so by going to one of these with the sample of the unknown murderer back then, let's assume it was probably 2 or 3 years ago. That's a guess. They said, do you have anybody in here who's related? Now, remember how much easier this makes it. They were, for some dumb reason, going to these places initially and saying, do you have a match? They said, no, that was it. Until finally somebody came along and said, wait a minute, turn off this, you have to match 10 points on 10 points. Do you have a match of any, 2 or 3 points? And the agency said, well, that person, that won't be your murderer. That'll just be somebody who's related to him. Duh, that's exactly what we want. And that's what they did. And sure enough, within a short time, the company, and I don't know which one it is, and I noticed they're very careful not to say which one it is, because that would probably hurt their business if it came out that this is the company that is turning over, without your permission, your DNA results to the police. There are going to be a lot of people who say, hey, I think I did something about 10 years ago that I really don't want my DNA looked into. So the company would go bankrupt. So that's why you're not being told in either case. We're talking about Mr. Heurmann's case, or in California, the slasher here, the killer, the Golden State Killer. In neither of those cases are you being told which for-profit company it was that did the search and came up with a partial match. So you come up with a partial match, and that allows you they give you the name of that person. That person probably knows nothing at all about the murders, but the police, or the FBI actually in this case, can go to the person and say, hey, we hear from so-and-so genealogy company that you have DNA that matches somebody who we're looking for. Huh? And so they say, do you have a relative that is male, approximately this age, and there would have been roughly 40 to 60 at that time, because the murders were at least 13 years old, and there's a very good chance that there's a 1998 murder that is also part of his collection of foul deeds. But we don't know yet, and he has not been charged with that. We're talking about Mr. Heurmann has not been charged with that. And they said to this person, whoever they may have been, your DNA matches somebody connected to a crime we're looking into. Doesn't prove anybody did anything. Yes, it does. So they say, do you have a relative who lives somewhere near Gilgo Beach? And so somebody said, Gilgo Beach? Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's my uncle. That's my cousin Rex. He lives right near there. He's about 59 years old. Really? Okay. So that's how they got Rex's name. And then they said, now all we need is Rex's DNA. That's the pizza box story. So they watch for him to be throwing out a piece of his delicious Ray's pizza. That's a New York joke, you see. There is a belief there that the very best pizza in New York is from a restaurant called Ray's Pizza. But because of that, there are now 1,000 different places calling themselves the original Ray's Pizza. Ray's Pizza right here. This is the Ray's Pizza you've heard so much about. And there's no way for anybody to know which one is the one that actually has the greatest pizza. So now we know how they found him. They got a little tiny piece of DNA off of a piece of his pizza. And what happened next? Oh, it matched the killer of the 3 women, I believe, on Gilgo, and they're still working on the 4th. So that's how the connection between... And to the best of my knowledge, I'm the only person pointing that out at this point. So there's no one else that's caught that both of these killers were now caught through these have your genealogy investigated and handed back to you. No thanks. That's all right. That's a secret I'd rather do without, as I have found out most secrets are. So that's the reason that these 2 killings are related, and why that particular type of solving of crimes will probably go up in the next little while, but then will drastically drop as people just say, you know what, that's a business I want nothing to do with. I am not sending my DNA anywhere to be investigated because I don't want somebody coming out of the blue and saying, don't you remember about 15 years ago you had blah, 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 and you did XYZ? Well, we've got the DNA from that, and you're under arrest. Now, the problem is, for law enforcement, it would have to just be a murder probably, because otherwise the statute of limitations would have run. Unless somebody publishes a new law saying that, remember that there are statutes that say delayed discovery of a crime is reason to allow the statute of limitations to be extended, and they could just say, well, until we got the DNA examined by Genealogy USA or whatever company it was, we didn't know that a crime had been committed. Or we didn't know who did the crime, so we had no reason to arrest them, and there might be different theories under which we can see the statute of limitations lengthened to bring these people in. But I think right now none of those are going to hold up in court. The only one that will hold up in court is murder, because there's no statute of limitations on murder that I know of in the U.S. It's commonly said. Is there possible that someplace in here has one? It's possible, but I don't think so. So that's the reason for this. I'm trying hard to get a nice photo, a nice accurate photo of this front porch. I want you to see it, but they're not publishing any, and the police have formed kind of a ring around the house to keep you from getting photos, because you could publish a photo that might theoretically hurt the case. Because if a juror comes in and says, well, yeah, I've seen that house, and it sure looks to me like where a weirdo would live. Oh, boy. So now you've got a tainted jury. So that's what's going to be happening. There's nothing other than that. I have it on background that Heurmann is on, yes, positively is on suicide watch, that they are worried that he might try to commit suicide. And in my experience, it really means that they're expecting that somebody's going to help him do the suicide. Remember, you think that those are people in that jail that have absolutely no morals whatsoever, but a lot of people in the jail, he's in a jail, not a prison, because he hasn't been tried and convicted yet. Not that he's going for certain to be convicted, but those are conditions precedent that have to happen before he's put into a prison normally. There are people in there that have daughters. There are a lot of men in there that have daughters, or they even have not only daughters, but they might have a sister or a wife who is involved in that, unfortunately, in that line of business where they're so desperate for drugs that they're willing to allow men to insert the penises into them. You have to imagine how desperate for drugs a woman has to be in order to say, oh, God, these stinky, smelly men that I can't stand. Like, look at Rex Heurmann. I mean, he's no Brad Pitt, and yet he's got women by the dozen because he had the money to give them that they needed for their drugs. We think he had the money. Actually, he may never have paid them, right? And somebody's here going to point out, we don't even know if he had anything to do with them. He hasn't been found guilty of anything, and that is clearly correct. He does hold the record. He has, to my knowledge, he has licenses, permits for 92 guns. He has registered 92 guns to his name. Why does a guy who doesn't go out of the house need 92 guns? He might be a little weird. It's possible, huh? You think? Oh, yes, it is. Okay, anyway, please, I'm going to have a lot more details on this case. And although normally I'm going to be doing my podcasts on Mondays, if there's any breaks in the case, such as if Heurmann did attempt suicide, or somebody in the jail attempted to help him with his planned suicide, we would immediately break in and let you know that. But the only way I can break in and let you know that is if you ring that bell. See the bell there? And if you subscribe and give me a thumbs up. And I know you're so tired of hearing every last person say, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and ring the bell. I know you're tired of hearing it, but unfortunately, that is the computerized program that YouTube and Amazon and all of the other, Spotify, all of the companies have to measure how much advertising or how much they're going to call attention to your particular podcast. And I think we've got a lot to say, and that we put it into a very small space. So this is Glenn Fleetwood, your former criminal defense attorney for 33 years, signing off temporarily on the Heurmann murder trial, and we'll be back next week or sooner, depending on whether any big stories on this topic burst. And remember, you heard it here first.